another time because of OHI 135 themes in African prehistory. It is knowledge area number 2. Area title is, the knowledge title is practicing archaeology. We have 3 modules which are going to be discussed. We discuss on location, survey and recording of archaeological sites. We will see what are the archaeological excavations, and at the end we'll see the process of analysis and interpretation of archaeological records. Archaeological site. What is an archaeological site? An archaeological site is a place or a group in which the evidence of past activities is preserved. So when we say it is a place, it can be a group of physical sites. It can have a number of archaeological materials which makes a site. And that site can either be prehistoric, it can be historic, and it can even be a contemporary site. So in simply you can say an archaeological site is a place in which evidence of past activities is preserved. We have different types of sites. As we said, it can be historic, it can be prehistoric, or it can be contemporary, but we have also different type of sites. When we say Olduvai Gorge site, when we say Laitoli site, when we say the Kaore ruins, when we mention the Zanzibar Stone Town, each one of those sites is having its special records which can be within those historic, prehistoric, or the contemporary sites. So the first one we have habitation sites. These includes of the open campsites as well as the villages. So these are places where people used to live, or the places where people used to meet for several reasons, or to do several activities. Those are the habitation sites or open campsites. Also, we have the caves and rock shelters. These are also archaeological sites. At the caves, these are the places where the past human beings used to live, especially during the period of the hunter-gatherers. These people used to live in caves. Also, when you say rock shelters, they are the same as caves, but they differ in structure. Sometimes we have the overhangs and the rocks which have an inside part of it. So they differ a bit, and these are the places where now we find even the so-called the rock art or the rock painting within these places, the caves and the rock shelters where the hunter-gatherers used to live in there. Also, another type of site, we have the earthworks, which include the mounds and the forts. Also, we have the ceremonial sites. These are the places where um, people used to go and perform different activities. For instance, the shrines where the people used to go and do some ritual activities or ritual conducts. And also we have the architectural sites. These are the work of architecture. We have the buildings which are being used in those times, which are still having significances in our history, and they are therefore preserved to date. There are some architectural sites, especially when you go to Kilwa, there are architectural sites. You go to Bagamoyo, there are architectural sites. But also these, they can be historic sites. So it depends on the nature of the materials or the records which are found there. Also, we have the burials and cemeteries. A good example is the Egypt tombs, the pyramids. These are examples of the burial cemeteries. And lastly, we have the historic sites, like the one we have at Bagamoyo, the Kaole ruins. These are the historical sites. So these are examples of the types of historical sites. How do we find archaeological sites? We know a number of sites. For instance, here in Tanzania, as I've mentioned, we have Raitori, where there is preservation of the footprints of the past humans. We have Old Gorge. We have the Kilwa Kisiwani ruins, the Bagamoyo ruins. We have Isimila. We have Kondoa Ilangi sites. How were these sites discovered? What happened for them to be known to date? There are various ways of finding these archaeological sites. The first one is through visual observations. Just there are materials of archaeological significance which can just be seen by our naked eyes easily. So that's the first way of discovering a site, knowing that here there is something of archaeological importance. So we observe the objects on the surface of the earth which are of archaeological significance, or they have something to explain related to the understanding of the past human lives or the past human history. Another way of finding sites or finding a site is through the use of old maps and other historical documents to see where people used to live. Because as we said, archaeology is the study of the past human life. So a site of archaeological importance must be a place where human life existed. So there was existence of either human beings, it can be of non-human primates, but mostly human beings. So if through the documents or old maps, you see or you come to discover this is a place where people lived, it can be easily to be located as a site, because everywhere where human life touched, that means there is history which has to be reconstructed. And another way of finding archaeological sites is through talking to people. So you can get information of a site through talking to people, people who are knowledgeable about several occurrences of human life in the past. They can just guide an archaeologist to discover a site. For instance, you go to a place looking for, let's say, rock shelters or rock paintings. Through talking to people, you can get directed to the place where there are rock shelters, and through that information, you can discover site. So you can also get to discover an archaeological site through talking to people. Another way of finding a site is through studying of land. Through studying of land. They say people often live to the places where they know they can get their necessities. For instance, near water bodies or near water sources, there is likely to be existence of human life there. So at places like those, when you go, it is easier to predict that there might be a site somewhere around this area because of studying the land. Or sometimes you can use the new methods of using the geographical information system, which helps to construct the environmental models that can tell where the site might be located. I think this is also used these days. You can use it to locate a place. So sometimes you might have read something from written documents, but it is not easy for one to go and locate the place directly. So if not through the information of you get from talking to people, you can use the GIS, which can direct you to the place where you are looking for. Another way of finding a site is through accidental discovery. There is an archaeological term which is being used to mean the accidental discovery, which is called serendipity. We call it accidental discovery or a lucky discovery. So it just happened out of someone's knowledge. Just you might find things which are of archaeological importance and you just discover there was a site. And it's not necessary that you find that site because you went direct or purposely searching for that site. You might be on your walkover somewhere, but you find a place which has the things which tells these can be of archaeological importance. And we will see that it's not, it doesn't end up there, that when you find things which are of archaeological importance, you just call it a site. There are other processes which has to follow. For instance, you have to do a survey, you have to do excavation, and from there now you can discover some records, past records, which can tell you this is a site of a certain nature. And also the other way is through documentary research. Documentary research or archival research. When you do this, you can find a lot of sites which are found at different places instead of just go and do a guesswork of looking for a site. So sometimes written documents can direct an archaeologist to discover or to find a site at a certain place. After finding an archaeological place, archaeological site, there is recording which has to follow. If you find a site, then you have to record that site. So how do we record an archaeological site? What is to be done when you are recording an archaeological site? This involves choosing a site to study. You choose which site you want to study, then you visit it. And you get to understand what is at that site. So that's the first step you have to do when you want to record an archaeological site. First, you choose which site to study. Then you visit the place and you see what is at that site. Another way of doing recording of archaeological site is to measure and draw the site. You measure and you draw the site. Also, to make notes of what is anything that you encounter at that site, and also to photograph various structures or features that have survived at that site, so that you keep the memory of what is happening at that site. And when doing recording, often it includes the study of aerial photographs, historic maps, and also some archive documents. Also, you can gather local information about the place and get to know who are the people who lived there. Who are the people lived there? So that's how you can do the recording of an archaeological site. But we have to ask ourselves, why doing recording of archaeological sites? Can someone just go and excavate and get the archaeological records and document? What makes one record the site? For what purpose? Why is it for? Site recording is done so as to rescue the archaeological materials from disappearing. Because, as I said, when you go now, you want to study the site and get what was at that site. Some excavations might be used or might be applied. So when you do excavations, that means you get off the materials which were found at that site. And as you know, as archaeologists, when you take those materials, you take them either to a museum or somewhere else. So they are not left at the site. They are taken from the site. So in order for other people to know something was existing here, some record has to be done. So in order to rescue the material from disappearing, or you might find something which cannot be taken off. When I was saying you excavate and get the material off the site, there are things like, let's say, artifacts. You can carry those artifacts, whether you are going to do some analysis somewhere else. But there are things which cannot be taken off the site. For instance, the rock paintings. They are these are the pictures on the rocks, so you can't take them. But in order for the other generation to know there were rock paintings at a certain location, you have to record that place. And it involves a number of things. Place name, even you use the GIS to locate the place. So that's why we do site recording. So to rescue the material from disappearing or from being forgotten by other people. Another reason for why we do recording of archaeological site is it is done so as to facilitate the sharing of histories by investigating the remains of the past, which is an important aspect of our cultural heritage. So when you record and you put them in writings, that means people will know what is found or what is happening at a certain place. Another reason for why do archaeological recording of sites is it provides a sense of place. It gives people to know the connections between the people who once lived at a certain area. So in recording, as I said, it involves a lot of things. So it includes who was living there, what were their life ways, what were their economic systems, and which technology were they using. So through that, you can just get other people to know the potential archaeological information about the given societies at a certain place or a certain location. Another aspect is archaeological excavations. We have been mentioning excavations. So what does it mean when we say excavation? This can be defined as the exposure, processing, and recording of archaeological remains. Exposure, processing, and recording of archaeological remains. When we say exposure, it means it involves the digging process, but it is called a systematic digging, not as how we dig in our farms by using hoes and other stuff. So it is a systematic digging which involves a number of archaeological tools like the trowels, like the shovels, and the picks. So it is a systematic digging of the earth's surface so as to reveal or to expose the buried materials which might have archaeological significance. So that's what we call excavation. So excavation is controlled, is simply a controlled exploration of what lies below the surface. That's why I said it involves a systematic digging of the Earth's surface. So it is done by a controlled exploration of what lies below the surface. Usually it is carried out systematically and graded trenches with shovels and trowels. Why excavation? Why digging? Why exposing the Earth's surface, the below, the Earth's surface and the underground? Excavation is done so as to reveal the past human activities that took place at that particular site at a time. So through the process of excavations, archaeologists tries to see what was happening in the past at this site. So it will study the culture, the technology, and the past ways of life in its totality. So it's through excavation. When you excavate, you encounter some archaeological materials, say artifacts, artifacts, and through studying them, analyzing them, and interpreting them, you can reconstruct the cultural history of the place or of that site. So when doing excavation, there are various ways of doing these excavations. We call the types of excavation. Basically, we have two types of excavations. We have the vertical excavation, or sometimes called a trench excavations, and we have the horizontal excavation, or sometimes known as area excavation or open excavation. So let us see what vertical excavation is. This is the kind of excavation which is done to reveal the stratification of the site, so as to sample different layers and the chronological sequence of the site. It is the method which is done to reveal the stratification or the stratigraphy of a site. And when doing vertical excavation, the thing which wants to be introduced at that site is to know the time range of the materials which are found at that site at different sequences, at different layers, at different stratigraphies. So that vertical relationship of the layers may provide information about the cultural history of that site. So archaeologists do then a systematic excavation so as to reveal what is found at every layer. So the dimensions depends. We call them, you might go with a certain dimension, let's say some inches or some centimeters. Each layer has to have some dimensions, and you record at every layer what has been found, what has been excavated. We call them arbitrary levels. You dig by using arbitrary levels, like you decide. And it is said that doing vertical excavation, it ends up to a place where there is sterile soil, to a place where you find no more materials. So, or you might find reoccurrence of the same materials. So when you get to that place, then you know the soil is sterile, I can't get any more information. So the culture history of the people who lived at this place ends up here. That's where the vertical excavation was done. So excavation is done by using arbitrary levels with small increments of excavation, which is done very carefully, so that you can't break the materials, like there are delicate materials like the bones. If you don't do a systematic excavation, you can just break them up. So it is done very carefully and paying close attention to any changes you encounter at every level. So even the change of soil color tells something to an archaeologist. So if the color changes, someone has to pay attention of and see what is happening at this level. And if you find an archaeological material lying down in that layer, it has to be recorded, the context, the levels, and everything. So the soil color, as I said, can identify something or can tell about something. So you have to study it and see what was happening at that site. So that's what we call vertical excavation. Another type of excavation is horizontal or area excavation. This is an excavation which is done by opening up a larger part area so as to reveal the spatial relationship between artifacts, features, and structures in that layer. When we say spatial relationship, it simply means of space. So relationship in terms of space. If you find some artifact features lying in the same layer, there might be an explanation on those materials that maybe they occurred at the same time. So that's why we say the main purpose of doing horizontal excavation is to establish the spatial relationship between the archaeological materials which are going to be found at that place. In other words, horizontal excavation is aimed at revealing the way that site was used, whereby archaeologists may excavate some strips of the surface at the site to expose any objects lying near the surface. So most of the time, area or horizontal excavation is done so as to reveal the site use. How was the site used? So it is there where we can discover this was a campsite, or this was a ceremonial site, or this was a burial site. So horizontal excavation, and the difference between these two is when you are doing vertical excavation, you go deeper and deeper, trying to establish the layers, the stratigraphy. But when doing horizontal excavation, you don't go deeper, but you go horizontal. It is wider compared to the vertical excavation type. It is not wide, but it goes deeper. Horizontal excavation doesn't go deeper, but is wide. So excavation of sites proceeds by these two methods. I mean the horizontal excavation method and vertical excavation method, layer by layer, and the foundation of the sites are uncovered. As I said, excavation ends when the soil seems to be sterile. Sterile means there are no any more discoveries. You don't encounter any archaeological materials or any materials which seem to be of archaeological significance. So when we find that level where there are no more materials, then excavation can end up there. Or sometimes you find the same material. If it is accumulation of bones, you just find accumulation of bones. If it is lithic materials, the stone tool, you just find the same materials of lithics. Then you know there is nothing more I'm going to encounter at this place. So excavation can stop up there. Recording excavation. Recording excavation. Why are we doing recording? during excavation. The first reason is excavation itself is destructive because it involves revealing the Earth's surface, exposing the underground surface of the Earth. So that means you destruct the origin nature of that place. So because the materials which are found at that place are going to be removed from their original context and being taken somewhere else. Therefore, recording has to be done in order for that place to be understood by other people that something happened at this place. So that's why we do recording of during excavation, because we remove the materials from their original context, which they lied, and being taken to somewhere else. As I said, when you are doing excavation, you might just go now and start analyzing the materials so as to come up with construction of some pathways of life. Another reason of recording excavation is the materials discovered cannot be put back into the ground. So what remains is the way of documenting the materials or writing notes about the materials, photographs, memories, and also some drawings. You can do some drawings. So those are the only tools to reconstruct the trench. When you say the trench is the area which you are digging now, the structure you are digging, that's what you call a trench. So in order to establish a trench, by establishing a trench, we try to tell people what was in there before they got removed. So that's why we do archaeological recording of excavation. Therefore, accurate recording is essential component in any project, and excavation is meaningless without written and visual records. So principally, when you are excavating, anything you encounter during excavation has to be recorded visually and has to be taken notes. So you have to take a photograph before removing that thing or that material from its original context, and you have to document it, the orientation, everything. So that's recording. What are the important things to consider when recording excavation? What are the things that you have to use as your guide when you are doing archaeological recording of excavation at a particular site? The first one is records must be kept up to date and complete as possible. So everything necessary, everything important has to be recorded. That's why we say must be kept up to date and complete as possible. Also, records should be clear enough that anyone can understand them. So you have to write detailed notes of the record that has been found at that site, so that everyone who reads the notes that you have written gets to understand what was in there. Again, the record must be permanent. The record must be permanent. You can use archival paper, make some copies, and as soon as possible. And for the advancements in technology now, you can just keep the soft copies of information which can be kept somewhere where generations and generations can just get to access those informations, apart from those days we used to use written documents, but now it's more easier. So record must be permanent, or must be permanently kept somewhere, so that generations and generations can just access. Another important point to consider when recording excavation is field records are only one aspect of the overall research, and therefore must be integrated with other records. The field reports is only one aspect of the overall research, and therefore it has to be integrated with other records. That's what we call cross-referencing. You check with other important informations and try to check how do they relate. If one has to supplement the other, you have to do so. Another aspect is archaeological interpretation and analysis. After we have excavated the materials and we have removed them from their original context, now we want to analyze and see, so as we can reconstruct the cultural history or the past life ways at a particular site. So in interpreting and analyzing these archaeological records, there are things which are involved. The first thing, when you come with your bag of excavated materials, say, you have to do classification, what we call classification. But because when you are doing an excavation, you encounter a lot of materials of different nature. There are bones, there are metals, there are lithics. So in order to do an effective interpretation and analysis of those materials, the first thing to do is classifying them, or simply mean grouping them according to their nature. The metal items have to be together, the lithics, I mean the stones, and the bones have to be together. So that's what you call classification. So classification means the arrangement of things according to their observable characteristics. So the first observation, or the first observable characteristics, is looking at the nature of the materials themselves, that these are of the same nature. These are bones, these are lithics, and these are metals. So that's the first thing to do when you are doing a classification. Arrangement of things according to their observable characteristics. And through doing that, you can make identification of those materials easier to understand than when they are mixed up. And the most useful method of classifying these artifacts is the assessment of raw materials. As I said, that you may find stone tools, metal tools, bone tools. So the first thing to do when you are classifying these materials is looking on the raw materials which has been used to make those tools or those remains. It can be of stone, it can be of clay, it can be of metal, it can be of glass. Have the porcelains and everything. We have the pot shades, we have the arrows, we have the lithic materials. So they have to be classified with regard to their raw materials, which they are made up or made of. And therefore, in doing that classification, there is something known as typology. typology. So typology is the result of classification. Typology is the result of classification. When you are grouping according to their nature, let's say raw materials, so we go to typology. This is the classification of things according to their physical characteristics. At first, we say classification as it is, you group the materials according to their materials, raw materials, which they are made of. But when you go to typology now, you classify the things according to their physical characteristics. We will see what are these physical characteristics. So let us see forms of typology. What are these physical characteristics which can help an archaeologist to classify or to group these these remains or records found in the excavations? The first one is functional. Functional typology. Functional typology means the artifacts are sorted according to their use. How were they used? How are they used for? So it is classification of the artifacts or the materials according to the use they serve. So that's the first type of typology. We said according to their physical characteristics. And the physical characteristics are, the first one is function aspect. What were they used for? You can group them together. Another aspect of classification through typology is stylistic typology. Stylistic typology. This type of typology is you group the materials according to the styles which is found within those materials. An example is, let's say you have excavated and came across the pottery sheds. Pot sheds. We know some of the pot sheds were decorated. So you can rearrange or classify those pottery materials according to the nature of their styles. Let's say the decorations, we call them the impressions. Those are the decorations on the pottery materials. So that's what we call the stylistic typology. That the kind of typology which accounts for information told through the artifacts. What are you getting? What information are you getting when you see that artifact? There is something different, unique, compared to the other. You might find a potsherd which is plain, and you find a potsherd which has decoration. That means the plain potsherds can be grouped together, and the potsherd with some impressions or decorations can be put together too. And another form of typology is chronological typology. This is a sequential ordering of archaeological artifacts based on form. It involves collecting dates or relative dates that establishes the position in time of artifact. When we say chronological typology, it is the kind of classification which is done with regard of time frame of those materials. As we said, when you are excavating, you go layer by layer, and there are some laws which are applied, like the superposition law or the association law. So through that, you can discover these were of the same, maybe they happened or they were used contemporary. And these ones, through the layers, you can say this came before the other. So that is chronological typology. Through time frame, you can just rearrange that this came before the other. Getting to chronological typology dating, or sometimes we call archaeological dating. We say chronological typology has the element of time. So the aspect of dating gets in this chronological typology. When you are analyzing or interpreting the archaeological materials, there are two ways which are involved when you want to establish the chronology or the date of the materials. So archaeological dating can be either done through relative method or relative chronology or relative dating, and also absolute chronology or absolute dating. So what is relative chronology or what is relative dating? Relative dating means the science of determining the relative order of past events without necessarily determining their absolute age. So relative dating does not include the aspect of numerals. You don't mention the age or the dates of the materials. That's why it is called relative. There are methods which are used to establish the chronology or the dates of the materials, which doesn't involve the use of numbers as it is for absolute chronology, as we will see. So it is the aspect of the science of determining the relative order of past events without necessarily telling their absolute age. So there are ways which can be used now to establish the relative chronology or relative dating. The first one is through stratigraphy. And stratigraphy is guided by the principle of superposition. So through the theory of superposition, this means the older artifacts are usually found below the younger items. As I said earlier, the lower the layer, the older it is, and the upper the layer, the younger it is. That means the layers, the below layers, were buried before the upper layers. But mind, this had to be in a site or a place where the soil was intact, was not disturbed, since the time these materials were deposited. But if any human activity happened there, there is no way you can use the theory of superposition. For instance, at sites where excavations have been done, you can't go and apply the theory of superposition because the land is already disturbed. So everything is not at its original context, and therefore you cannot apply the stratigraphy or superposition principle. So simply, the stratigraphy is one of the methods of establishing a relative chronology or relative dating, is that if you find the materials are buried, it means they were deposited earlier than the materials which are upper those materials. So that's stratigraphy as well as the law of superposition. Another way of relative dating or relative chronology is seriation. Here it means you establish the chronology or the dating of the materials according to their styles and frequency to create a relative chronology. Sorry. To establish a relative chronology. Seriation means you arrange the materials which are of the same nature, which seemed to occur at a certain period of time, in a big occurrence. They occurred at a certain time frequently, maybe due to style, due to fashion. The materials happened or were being used. So you group them together because they occurred at the same time. So we say the materials are separated and classified by style and frequency to create a relative chronology. So you might find, let's say, the portraits. Portrait of certain decorations seemed to appear at a certain time, and the other type, maybe of praying, appeared at the same time. So you just relatively establish their dates, that these came before the other type of portraits or style, pot style. So that's what we call seriation. Another form of establishing relative chronology is through fauna dating. Here we use animal bones to determine the age of cultural artifacts embedded with those layers, which but when we want to establish the best way of establishing this relative chronology by using animal bones, it is said that those bones must be of animals which evolved quickly, widely, and maybe if they had mass extinction, it is where you can establish a certain time frame. If they happened or they evolved quickly, you can just establish that this kind of species happened at this time. And if they widely spread at a given time, you can also establish. Or if there was a time where they encountered mass extinction, you can also establish that these animals happened at this time. So you can relatively establish that date. And the last type is through polynology. Polynology. This is the study of fossilized pollen to establish time frame of relics. Of course, each one of methods has its advantages and disadvantages. And some of documents have tried to criticize each type of chronology. Then we come to the second type of chronological typology or archaeological dating, which is absolute dating. This is the process of determining an age of specified chronology in archaeology as well as geology. Sometimes you might find something as chronometric dating or numerical dating. This is the same as absolute dating. So sometimes absolute dating is called numerical dating or chronometric dating. And this kind of dating came after, because relative dating was firstly established or came into use before absolute dating. And absolute dating came around 1950s. So there are other forms or types of carbon dating, absolute dating. One of them is radiocarbon, or sometimes it is well known as carbon 14. This method is used to determine the age of organic matter. So dating of materials using carbon 14 or radiocarbon means the materials must have to be organic materials and not otherwise. So, but it is said to date the materials which goes up to 50,000 years ago. Above that time, the distance passed, they don't go beyond. So Radiocarbon or carbon-14 dates the materials up to the age of 50,000 years old. And this kind of dating is possible because all organic matters, including the bones and other hard parts, contain carbon content in them. So there is the best way of dating them. That's why I said carbon-14 has to be used only to date the organic matters, because non-organic matter may not be having the carbon content. Another type is potassium argon dating. This is another form or type of dating through chronometric dating or absolute dating. This method is used for estimating the age of minerals or rock based on measurement of the rate of decay of the radioactive potassium into argon. And that's why in the first lecture, in the knowledge area 1, I said the relationship between archaeology and science. Here we got to see the element of science is really getting into archaeology when it comes to the aspect of dating archaeological materials, potassium argon, as well as carbon-14. Another way of dating archaeology through absolute dating method is through dendrochronology. Dendrochronology, or sometimes it is referred to tree rings dating. So this dating is usually done to get the age of wood materials, especially the recent materials, because it doesn't date far back as it is for carbon-14 and other methods. So the materials must be at least of the recent past. And how is this done is tree limbs. The application is when you cut down a tree, you can observe some circular rings which are going around the tree. Those are the ones which are called tree rings. And when you count them, they are said every ring is referred to or equal to one annual rainfall that happened in the life of that tree. So when you count those tree rings, you can get to establish the age of that tree. So if you encounter materials somewhere, those trees, it can be easy to establish the age of those materials in relation to those tree rings. It's a bit scientific, but that's how it is done. Then also there are some criticisms about this method. There are issues of climate and all. Sometimes it is hard to establish because every place has a nature of climatic conditions, so it depends on where are the trees found. But all in all, through counting of those tree rings, you can establish the materials which are associated with those tree rings. And that's all. Thank you for listening.